They say the truth will set you free, but for me, it felt like a death sentence. It started with a $50 DNA kit I bought on a whim, a joke between me and my husband. But when the results hit my inbox, my entire 30-year history vanished. The man who raised me, the man I called Dad, wasn't even on the list. Instead, there was a stranger named Silas Vance. And the most terrifying part, my mother wasn't surprised at all. I grew up in what you'd call a golden home. My father, Mark, was the kind of man who would wake up at 5 a.m. every single Saturday just to drive me to my soccer tournaments across the state. He wasn't just my dad, he was my person. We had this ritual where, every Sunday evening, we'd sit on the porch, eat ice cream, and talk about everything. My school stress, my dreams, even my first heartbreaks. Looking back at old photos, it's hard to believe it was all a shadow. There's one photo of us on my 10th birthday. I'm sitting on his shoulders, laughing so hard my eyes are closed, and he's looking up at me with so much pride. My mother, Linda, was always the one behind the camera, capturing our perfect bond. She was the bubbly, creative soul of the house, always telling me how I had my father's spirit. Last November, my husband David and I were relaxing after a huge Thanksgiving dinner. The house was quiet, the fireplace was crackling, and we were just scrolling through our phones. David saw an ad for a DNA ancestry kit and laughed. "Sarah, imagine if we're actually related to someone famous, or if I have some secret Viking blood." At first, I hesitated. I'm a private person. But David was so excited, and I thought, why not? It's just $50 and a bit of fun. We ordered the kits right then and there. When they arrived a week later, we stood in the kitchen, joking about how weird it felt to spit into a tube. I remember sealing my envelope, licking the stamp, and handing it to the mailman with a smile. I had no idea that inside that small white envelope, I was sending away the only identity I had ever known. I was 30 years old, and I was about to find out that Sarah, the girl in the soccer photos, the girl on the porch, didn't actually exist the way I thought she did. Weeks passed. To be honest, I had almost forgotten about the DNA kit. Life went on as usual. I went to work, had dinner with David, and called my parents every Sunday like clockwork. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, while I was sitting in my office cubicle with a lukewarm cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a simple notification. "Your DNA results are ready. Log in to view your ethnicity and matches." I remember feeling a tiny spark of excitement. I nudged my coworker and joked, "Get ready to bow down, I might be 2% British royalty." I clicked the link, entered my password, and waited for the page to load. The blue bar at the top of the screen crawled slowly, too slowly. When the page finally opened, I saw a map of the world. My eyes skimmed over it. 60% Western Europe, 30% Scandinavia. Okay, cool. But then I saw the tab that said DNA matches. That's where the site lists people who share your genetic code. Usually it's third or fourth cousins you've never met. I clicked it. At the very top of the list, under a bold heading that said Close Family, there was a name I had never heard in my entire life, Silas Vance. Underneath his name, in small, clinical text, it read, "Relationship, father. Shared DNA, 49.8%. I stopped breathing. I actually felt the air leave my lungs. I looked further down the list, searching for my dad's name, Mark. He wasn't there. I refreshed the page. I thought maybe the site is glitching. Maybe I'm looking at someone else's account. But no, there was my name in the corner, Sarah Miller. And there was Silas Vance sitting at the top of my family tree like a dark, unwanted secret. My hands started to shake so violently that I almost knocked my coffee over. I stared at the profile picture Silas had uploaded. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with a rugged face and deep-set gray eyes. I looked at my own reflection in the black screen of my computer monitor. My gray eyes stared back at me. I looked at his nose, a slightly crooked, distinctive bridge. I touched my own nose. It was identical. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. For 30 years, I had looked in the mirror and seen Mark's daughter. Now, in a split second, I was looking at a total stranger. I couldn't stay at work. I told my boss I had a family emergency, which wasn't a lie, and I ran to my car. I sat in the parking lot for an hour, the engine off, just staring at that name on my phone's screen. Silas Vance. Who was he? Was he a ghost from my mother's past? Or was this all some horrible mistake at the lab? I spent the next 4 hours doing what anyone in the 21st century does. I became a private investigator. I searched for Silas Vance on every social media platform. I found him on Facebook. He lived in a town just 40 miles away from where I grew up. He was a carpenter. He posted photos of old trucks he was restoring. He had 2 grown sons. I looked at photos of his sons. They looked like me. They had my smile. They had my forehead. Seeing them felt like being punched in the stomach. These were my brothers. People I had lived near my entire life, and I didn't even know they existed. The most haunting part wasn't the discovery itself. It was the realization of the lie. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every time my mother told me I had my father's heart, she was looking at me and seeing Silas. She was looking at the man who raised me and knowing that the blood in my veins belonged to someone else. I wanted to call her and scream. I wanted to drive to my parents' house and throw my phone at the wall, but I looked at a photo of my dad, Mark, on my phone's wallpaper. He was wearing a world's best dad hat I had bought him 3 years ago. If I brought this up, I wouldn't just be hurting my mother. I would be destroying the man who had been my entire world. I was standing at a crossroads. I could delete the app, throw the DNA kit in the trash, and pretend I never saw that name. I could go back to being Mark's daughter and live in a comfortable lie. Or I could pull on the thread and watch my entire family unravel. I stared at the message button on Silas Vance's profile. My finger hovered over the screen. If I clicked it, there was no going back. My life as I knew it would be over. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I typed, "Hello, Silas. My name is Sarah. I think we need to talk." The drive to my parents' house felt like I was heading toward a cliff. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want them to have time to prepare a lie. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Was I an accident? Was it a one-night stand? Did my dad, my real dad, Mark, know that I wasn't his? When I pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting, casting long, orange shadows over the house where I'd spent my entire childhood. It looked so peaceful. My dad was in the garage, fixing a lawnmower, and my mom was in the kitchen. I walked past my dad with a quick, tight-lipped "hey," not even looking him in the eye. I couldn't, not yet. I walked straight into the kitchen. My mom was humming a tune, stirring a pot of soup. She looked up, surprised and happy. "Sarah, what a surprise! Are you staying for dinner?" I didn't say a word. I just took my phone out, opened the DNA results, and laid it face up on the marble countertop. I watched her face. I watched the color drain from her cheeks in a way I've only ever seen in movies. She didn't even have to read the name. She saw the ancestry logo, and she knew. Her hand, still holding the wooden spoon, started to tremble. "Who is Silas Vance?" I asked. My voice was skin-thin, trembling with 30 years of built-up trust that was now evaporating. She didn't answer at first. She just stared at the screen. "Sarah, honey, it's complicated," she whispered. "Complicated?" I snapped. "Complicated is a math problem, Mom. A lie that lasts 3 decades is a choice. Was I ever going to know? Were you going to take this to your grave while I called a man my father who shares 0 blood with me?" Then the kitchen door opened. My dad, Mark, walked in, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. He saw the tension, saw my mom's tears, and then he saw the phone on the counter. The silence in that room was so heavy I felt like I was being crushed. I turned to him, my eyes burning. "Dad, do you know who this is?" I expected him to be confused. I expected him to be angry. But instead, Mark did something that broke my heart into a million pieces. He walked over to my mother, put a protective arm around her, and then looked at me with the most painful, loving expression I've ever seen. "I know who he is, Sarah," he said softly. I felt the floor drop out from under me. You knew all this time." Mark nodded slowly. "I've known since you were 6 months old. Your blood type didn't match mine. I did the math. I knew about Silas." I felt like I was losing my mind. "Then why didn't you leave? Why did you raise me like I was yours?" He walked toward me and took my shaking hands in his. His hands were rough and smelled like engine oil, the same familiar smell that had always meant safety to me. "Because Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "biology is an accident. Fatherhood is a choice. From the second I held you in that hospital, before the doubts ever started, you were my daughter. I didn't care whose DNA was in your veins. I cared about whose hand you held when you were scared. I cared about whose name you'd call out when you had a nightmare. I chose to be your father every single morning for 30 years, and I would choose it again 1,000 times over." I looked at him, this man who had protected a secret that wasn't even his just to protect me. My mother finally spoke, her voice thick with sobs. She told me the truth. She and Silas had a brief, messy breakup right before she met Mark. In a moment of weakness, they had one last night together. By the time she realized she was pregnant, she was already deeply in love with Mark. She told Silas she wanted a clean break. She chose the man who would be a real father, not just a biological one. I stood there, caught between fury at my mother's lie and an overwhelming, soul-crushing love for the man who didn't have to love me, but did anyway. My perfect family was gone, replaced by something messy, complicated, and painfully real. I realized then that Silas Vance might have given me my eyes and my nose, but Mark had given me my life. The weeks following the big reveal at my parents' house were some of the quietest and, paradoxically, the loudest of my life. The silence in our home was no longer the peaceful quiet of a happy family. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of things left unsaid. My mother moved into the guest room for a while, not because my dad asked her to, but because she couldn't look him in the eye without seeing the 30 years of grace he had given her, a grace she felt she didn't deserve. But for me, the questions didn't stop. Now that the secret was out, Silas Vance wasn't just a name on a screen anymore. He was a real person, a man who shared my DNA, living just 40 miles away. I knew that if I didn't meet him, I would spend the rest of my life wondering, what if? I didn't tell my parents when I drove out to meet him. I told David, my husband, who sat in the passenger seat and held my hand the whole way. We pulled up to a small, dusty workshop on the outskirts of town. The sign outside read, "Vance Custom Carpentry." My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I stepped out of the car, a man emerged from the workshop, wiping sawdust from his forehead. He froze when he saw me. He didn't have to ask who I was. He dropped the tool he was holding, and for a long minute we just stood there, 30 years of lost time stretching between us. "You look just like your grandmother," he whispered, his voice thick with an accent I didn't recognize. We sat on some upturned crates in his workshop, surrounded by the smell of cedar and varnish. Silas told me everything. He didn't try to make himself look like a hero. He admitted he was a mess back then, young, reckless, and broke. He told me that when my mom left him for Mark, he was devastated, but he also knew that Mark could give a child the life he couldn't. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, reaching into a worn leather wallet to pull out a yellowed ultrasound photo. "Your mother sent me this before she cut contact. I've carried it for 30 years. I didn't want to ruin your life, Sarah. I just wanted to know you were okay." As I sat there talking to him, I felt a strange sense of belonging. We liked the same music. We both had a weird habit of tapping our fingers when we were nervous. I saw where my artistic side came from. But as the sun began to set, I realized something even more profound. I felt a connection to Silas, yes, but I didn't feel that home feeling. I thanked Silas, promised to stay in touch, and got back in my car. As I drove back toward my childhood home, I realized I was speeding. I wasn't rushing to get away from Silas, I was rushing to get back to Mark. I pulled into my parents' driveway and saw my dad, Mark, sitting on the porch swing just like he always did. He looked older than he had a month ago. The weight of the secret had finally started to show on his face. I sat down next to him, and for a long time we just watched the fireflies in the yard. "I met him today," I said softly. Mark stiffened for a second, then nodded. And he's a good man, Dad. He's talented and he's kind. I think I'd like to get to know him." I saw a flash of pain in Mark's eyes, the fear that he was being replaced. I grabbed his hand, his rough, calloused hand that had held mine through every fever, every heartbreak, and every success. "But Dad," I continued, my voice trembling, "he might be my father, but he will never be my dad. That job was filled 30 years ago by a man who didn't have to stay, but did. He's a stranger I share blood with. You are the man I share a life with." Mark didn't say anything. He just pulled me into a hug and sobbed into my shoulder. In that moment, the lie didn't matter anymore. The DNA didn't matter. The only thing that was real was the love of a man who chose a daughter who wasn't his, and in doing so, became the greatest father a girl could ever ask for. My mother eventually came back into the fold. It took time, and it took a lot of hard conversations about honesty and trust. We aren't the perfect family anymore. We are something better. We are a family built on the truth, held together by a love that is stronger than biology. I still see Silas sometimes. I've met my half-brothers, and they are great guys. It's a bit messy, and the holidays are now twice as complicated. But when people ask me about my family, I don't tell them about the DNA test anymore. I tell them about the man who sat on a porch swing for 30 years, holding a secret in his heart, just so his daughter could grow up believing the world was a beautiful place. Because at the end of the day, your family isn't whose blood you carry. It's whose heart you carry within yours. And I am, and will always be, Mark Miller's daughter.